Thank you very much, Janice, and thanks to everyone in the room for having me here today. Really excited to talk to you about this new project from the Greenbelt Foundation on soil health. So in this presentation, I'll be going over the results from our first year, which was 2023, and then talk a little bit about what we'll be doing in the years to come. So the goal of this project, it's a 4-year project to sample soils across the Golden Horseshoe region, and we're looking at soil health testing. It's a partnership between the Greenbelt Foundation and the Soil Health Institute with many Ontario agricultural partners. We have a 12-member advisory committee and 2 subcommittees made up of agricultural organizations and members, including the OFA. We're combining the Soil Health Institute and OMAFRA's Soil Health Assessment and Plan protocol for testing soil health on farms in Ontario. And each participant in our project gets a detailed results report and management plan, which I'll go through a bit later. So the first goal, this project is focused on the Golden Horseshoe. We classify that as the 6 regions surrounding the city of Toronto and southern Lake Ontario. In these 6 regions, we're sampling grain and oilseed rotations, as well as long-term undisturbed sites. We started out last year sampling 2 broad soil types. Those are classified in our sample study as fine loamy, which is the green on the map. Those are clay loam type soils. Coarse loamy, which are sandy loams or loams, which is the orange on the map. But as reality set in, we realized we needed to add a few more soil types to make our study a bit more robust. So we're also looking at some fine silty soils. Most of that is blue in southern Hamilton area, and then some clay soils as well in the Niagara region. And these soil types make up about 80% plus of all the corn and soy acres that are grown in this region. So the first 2 years of this project is baseline data collection, and followed by 2 years of region-wide sampling. So the indicators for soil health that we're looking at, we're combining 2 different systems. The first is the Soil Health Institute system. So they have a minimum suite of indicators that they have determined are great indicators of soil health. These include soil organic carbon, aggregate stability through a slaking method, potentially mineralizable carbon, as well as an estimate of available water holding capacity in soils. The SHAP protocol, which has been promoted and developed through OMAFRA, they have 5 different metrics. Some are similar, a few are a bit different. They have organic matter, aggregate stability through a slightly different method, potentially mineralizable carbon, which is the same, permanganate oxidizable carbon, and then potentially mineralizable nitrogen. So the important things about these indicators, especially the first set from the Soil Health Institute, is they've been tested across North America and chosen for their reliability, their response to management, and their cost effectiveness. The overall goal of soil health testing is that eventually down the line, it'll become available to farmers on a wide scale, something that you can introduce to your farm once every 5-10 years, however you see fit, and that it'll be readily available just like a fertility test. So the concept of the project here is the benchmarking concept. This is a system that was developed from the Soil Health Institute that we're implementing for this project. It's to provide an interpretable, scalable, and locally relevant method for evaluating and monitoring soil health. So for the sampling for this project, we divide sites into 3 different categories: sites that are doing baseline or high tillage practices, sites that are doing soil health practices, which include low tillage and the use of some cover crops, and then reference sites, which are those long-term undisturbed sites. And in this practice, we can compare all the farms on similar soil types to each other and can provide farmers who participate in the program a really good understanding of where they fall along the continuum of others on the same soil type. So we'll see a bit later, but on this graphic here, that red line that says current, that would be the result for a particular field. And you can see that it falls to the lower half of that continuum. And that will allow a farmer to understand that, okay, my current soil health is at this level. If that's something I want to improve, I can see how much room I have to improve and what other farms in the area, what their soil health is like. Again, we're comparing on similar soil types, which I'll get to a bit later, and that's super important. It also provides an understanding of what the upper limits of soil health could be for that particular type. So that helps you rein in your goals a little bit and make sure that we're making attainable goals and not trying to add carbon or organic matter to soil that's just not possible in a cropping system. So the three types of management systems that we look at are the high tillage sites. So these are sites that are in all or most years of the rotation doing tillage and infrequently using cover crops. We have low tillage and cover crop sites. So these sites are using some form of no-till, strip-till, minimum till, or rotational till. And generally they're using cover crops at least once in their rotation. And then we also have reference sites. So these sites are undisturbed lands for at least 10 plus years. For this project, we've sampled hay fields, pastures, orchards, fence rows, and fallow land. So the sampling procedure for soil health testing is a little bit different than what you would do in a typical fertility test. We're looking at one general location per field and per soil type. We collect soil probes, about 30 in that general area, and we're looking for sample from 0 to 15 centimeters in depth and 15 to 30. We then composite that sample from those 30 different soil probes. We also do bulk density from 0 to 15 and 15 to 30 centimeters as well. And then we do an collect aggregates from the top 6 centimeters of the soil for the aggregate stability test. It takes 2 people about 1 hour to complete a soil health sample, and all of our data is analyzed at the Agri-Food Laboratory in Guelph. Oops, wrong way. Okay, so last year was our first year of the program. In 2023, we were targeting Hamilton, Halton, and Peel regions, and we added the town of Erin as well. We were able to collect 124 samples from 61 different farmers in those regions. We sampled fields across all 3 of those management types that I just talked about, as well as the reference sites. We sampled on owned and rented lands, and lands that are in and outside of the Greenbelt boundary. So important to note for this project is that we're not sampling only Greenbelt farmers, it's farmers in the Golden Horseshoe. And we were able to sample farms and fields of all sizes and of all different cropping types. So getting a bit more into the results here, we're looking at 124 samples here. And again, we're bringing back soil type, the modified soil texture triangle here. About half of our samples fell into that green category, which is again the fine loamy soils. And another half fell into the orange category, which is the coarse loamy soils. But as I said, we did find quite a few samples in the fine silty category, which is that little blue area on the triangle, so we added those in as well. One thing that we found being on the ground, I'm sure as many of you know, is Ontario's soil maps are quite outdated. So what we thought we would find going to a particular site, it might have been quite different on the ground. So that's just made it important for us to recognize and to adjust our project as needed. And the importance of collecting samples on the right soil type is that we want to compare each sample only to others on a similar soil type, because we know soil type is so important in terms of soil health. So of those sites, we had 38 in our high tillage category, 31 in the low tillage category, and 48 reference sites. Of those using soil health practices, 31% of them were fully no-till, and 71% of those sites had at least one cover crop in the last 5 years. Soil types that we found for our project were sandy loams, silt clay loams, and clay loams. So quick little results here. Across all of our samples, regardless of soil type, we were able to find that sites using low tillage and cover crops had about 20% or 1.2 times higher soil organic carbon, higher aggregate stability, and higher potentially mineralizable carbon than sites that were tilling most years. And comparing those sites that were tilling most years and not using cover crops to reference sites, there's much larger, obviously, concentrations of soil organic carbon, higher aggregate stability, and higher potentially mineralizable carbon, as we would expect. Again, these numbers are just from our first year of data, so as we get more data into the project, these numbers will likely change a bit. So this chart here, important thing I just wanted to bring up is that, like I mentioned earlier, all of these indicators of soil health are really responsive to management. And that's important because we want to understand that how we manage a soil really affects how healthy it is. So things like organic carbon, wet aggregate stability, and mineralizable carbon and nitrogen, they do change over time depending on your soil management. But also the first four on this chart here are also impacted by soil texture, specifically clay content. So that's important to know as well. And I'll get into that now. On this one here, so getting back into the management, we have the three categories here: high tillage in orange, low tillage sites in the blue, and then the reference sites in the green. And we're looking at organic carbon, wet aggregate stability, and potentially mineralizable carbon. Just the important thing to know is that how there's distinct peaks for each of the different management systems. So this is just reinforcing the fact that management really does have an impact on some of these soil health indicators, and it is quite distinct. Looking at specific indicators, potentially mineralizable carbon is a really good indicator for microbial activity. So on this chart, we're looking at all of our samples across the first year, and there's higher averages in microbial activity in sites that are using low tillage and incorporating some cover crops, and obviously much higher microbial activity in those reference sites. But soil texture was less of a factor. That's why we're comparing all of the samples together. However, when we look at aggregate stability, soil texture really does matter. On this graph, we're looking at aggregate stability on the y-axis and clay percentage on the x. And as you can see, as clay percentage increases, aggregate stability actually decreases across the soil texture. And though, however, it does change by soil type, we did find that management still has an impact, and that sites that are using low tillage and cover crops have higher aggregate stability compared to those high tillage sites at all textures. A similar story looking at organic carbon in the soils, that soil texture again really matters. On this case, we're looking at more clay equals more organic carbon naturally in the soil. So that's important to note, and that's why we're comparing soil textures to each other, because the amount of organic carbon a soil can store when it's really sandy is quite different than it can store if it's a really clay site. However, management still has an important role to play, and that sites using low tillage and cover crops had higher organic carbon, which is about half of organic matter, compared to high tillage sites, again at all textures. So here's a little example of what the results report looks like for our soil health project. We have two parts to the report. There's the results pages, and then there's a management plan. So this is the first page of the results, and this is looking at the Soil Health Institute's indicators. So this is that benchmarking system that we talked about earlier, and all of the data on this particular page only comes from our specific study in the Golden Horseshoe. So you're compared to other types, other soil samples taken in 2023 for this project. So at the 5 indicators there on the left side of the page, the red line indicates where that sample falls for that field, and then you see the ranges for the other 3 management systems as well. So it's a really good visual representation of where you're at now, where your neighbors on similar soil types are at, and where the potential is for you to improve should you want to do so. Again, we're providing direct comparisons to sites using different management systems, but on the same soil type. So we have already taken that into account. The second part of the results report is that OMAFRA-SHAP protocol. So here we're looking at the 5 indicators of soil health, and their method is a bit different in the fact that they use a large database that has soil samples taken from across the province of Ontario. So we're no longer looking at just the Golden Horseshoe samples, but there is a factor that takes into account soil type as well. So again, you're compared to a larger data set, and you have 5 indicators, and they use a color-coded system. So you get ranked within comparison to all the other samples in that database. If you're in the red, you're looking at low soil health values. If you're in the green, you're looking at high soil health values. So pretty intuitive and just a different visual way of looking at soil results compared to just some numbers on a page. So what do you do with all this data when you get it back? Some important things to know is that a lot of these numbers are things that you wouldn't find in your typical soil fertility test. So these may be new results to any farmer, but you would have seen and experienced the impacts of some of these indicators on your own farm over the years. So this might bring some clarity to what you've seen over the past years. It can help you determine your current baseline of where your soil health is at and where you might want to go. It can help confirm that long-term practices you've been doing, like 30 years of no-till or reduced till or adding those cover crops for a number of years, have resulted in improved soil health. This can help you prove that. You can compare new land that you just acquired to land that you've owned and managed for years and see how that stacks up. And then you can compare fence row values to field soil values as well. And improving the results. So improving soil health obviously takes some time, but most of the common sense practices that we know about do improve soil health. So things such as reducing tillage, such as the number of passes or the depth of that tillage, adding cover crops and keeping living roots in the soil as long as possible, adding organic amendments, and leaving crop residue on the field over the winter are all ideal ways to increase soil health. So the second part of the report is a management plan. This is something that we've worked with a certified crop advisor to develop over a number of months. And we do a ranking of the results, so your soil health indicators, and management across 4 categories to provide a bit of a plan. So taking your results, what do you do after you see those numbers? We're providing a little bit of a guidance on where you may want to go. So we want to provide information on practices that you should continue doing, recognizing that all farmers have really good practices underway, and we want to give recognition to things that are going well on the farm and are contributing to great soil health. Then we also have a category of things you might want to consider. If you want to improve your soil health, here are some ways that you might want to do that. And then we have recommendations for the short and long term on things that you could try to improve soil health, such as, again, reducing tillage, adding cover crops, adding organic amendments, all those great things. And then we also provide some connections to cost share resources on your farm that can help pay for some of these recommendations that we're providing. So early conclusions from the project is that fields using high tillage are generally lower in all soil health indicators. And fields that are using soil health practices do have higher soil health indicator values. So that proves that this system of ranking fields by soil health is working. But there's room to improve in all systems. I think we all know that no farming system is perfect, and there's always ways that we can improve, and that's not something to be scared of. There's many indicators that vary across soil type, and that's why it's been really important to us to compare soil types to each other, and we take this account into the project so that we know we're not comparing you to an unrealistic value for your soil type. And just a general note, I think many of you will have known this and talk earlier reinforces this, that organic matter is quite low across many fields in this region, and there's certainly room for biosolids, compost, manure to be added to fields in near urban areas. So I just want to give a quick little plug for this year's soil sampling. We're in York, Durham, and Niagara regions, looking for farmers on grain and oilseeds rotations. Sampling happens in the spring and summer, May, June, and July. It's a quick and easy process. I do most of the work with my team. So I come out, collect the sample, work on the results, get that back to you. So if you know anyone who's interested, or you yourself are interested, please give me a shout. I'd be happy to talk to you. And these are our priority soils for the next 2 years in York, Durham, and Niagara regions. Happy to talk to any farmer in those regions, but these are the soil types we talked about earlier that we're looking for. And I just wanted to give a big thank you to all of our partners and the Weston Family Foundation and Ontario government for funding this research. And just a big thank you to the OFA for your commitment to your project and the research team for being a strong partner on this project as well. So I'll take any questions now.
See a question over here.
I got 3 questions.
Yes.
One is, in high tillage, if the hay was in rotation, does that make a difference
If there's hay in the rotation?
in high tillage?
Yes, it certainly does. That increases the living roots. So sites that are using tillage to after a hay crop are generally higher in soil health. And that's where the multiple indicators come into play, is we're not looking at one specific indicator. So because you have hay in the rotation, that's a strong soil health practice. You get recognized for that, and the results will show that. Yeah.
The second question is, was any difference between solid manure or liquid dehydrated?
Does it make a difference the type of manure?
Yes.
Not that I know of, not a manure expert, but I think just any manure on the soil is better than none, in my understanding.
And the last question, when you did a test, and did you test the knolls?
Pardon?
I mean, when you do your test, and do you test the sandy knolls or the knolls in the fields?
We generally look for a mid-slope location. So we do a topographical map of the field, and we're looking for something in the middle to try and avoid the top of the knoll and then the bottom of it as well. So we try and take that into account, though it's not perfect depending on the field. We'll do our best.
Just while I make my way over here, Ryan, can you talk about whether there's any surprising results from your first year of sampling?
Yeah, I think more just confirming results. I think one thing that we found, like I had mentioned earlier, is that fields that are owned and rented, I think that's quite a difference in soil health between those two types of field, especially in the Golden Horseshoe region. There's a lot of rented land around those city urban areas. So something to note is that fields that are rented tend to be a bit lower in soil health. That makes sense. But this research is showing that for sure.
So I was just wondering why the Golden Horseshoe area? There's a lot more farmland out there than around the city of Toronto. How many acres does the study comprise, and how many of those acres are within the Greenbelt?
Yes, great question. So the idea of the soil health project came through the partnership with the Greenbelt Foundation and the Soil Health Institute. So obviously with the Greenbelt Foundation, their focus is on the Greenbelt area. So the natural extension of that was the Golden Horseshoe. There is other research projects, one from the University of Guelph with Laura Vinard, that's looking at implementing OMAFRA's SHAP protocol on fields outside the Golden Horseshoe. So we're playing very nicely together and switching names back and forth to try and get as many farmers in Ontario this soil testing as possible. Though it is very new, OMAFRA just released the protocol for how to sample for soil health last year. So this is quite new for the province, and we're really on the leading edge with these two research projects and trying to work together to get the best results possible.
Is there a background interest from the city of Toronto, city of Hamilton, everybody that's around there, of water quality and air quality issues coming off of that study?
I've had no conversations, and our team has had no conversations about that with any of the cities. Maybe, but they haven't reached out or we haven't had those conversations.
So just repeating that question for folks online, that was a question about whether there was concern from the municipalities about water quality. Is that a fair summary, Leo? Okay.
Yeah. Right.
So I don't think we saw this as a driving force for the interest in this work. I think the other thing too, you might have mentioned this, Ryan, but I mean, this is a pilot project in the geography, and it was a really big bite to just cover this geography.
Yes.
So it's a little bit of a trial and error to start piloting in these municipalities. But certainly the methodology for the project is transferable to go provincial as well.
Yeah.
And that was something that OFA was really interested in supporting the project. Any questions online, Danny? No? Other questions in the room? Because if not, I got some. Oh, Brian's got one at the back. Just while I'm making my way back there, I wonder, Ryan, can you talk about the process for sharing results with farmers? Because I know you talked about the results reports, but there's a whole process that goes along with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the results reports, we develop them in-house, and then we provide, there's those 3 pages that I showed on the slides and a few additional pages with the actual raw data. So you can see those raw numbers as well. All of that's handed back, and then we try and have a conversation with every participant so they're aware of how we did the sampling, what the results are, and we're on site to answer any questions that they might have about the results in real time, because we know that these are new tests and things can be a bit confusing. So myself specifically, am available for all of our participants to have that conversation about results and any practices going forward.
Excuse me. Yes, so my question, it's kind of a two-part question and a statement. I realize that it's probably not part of your study, but is there any relationship between higher soil health and higher yield? We would assume that better soil health would translate into better yield, but do we know that for sure? And the second part is, a farmer generally will gravitate towards the type of system that will return him the maximum amount of money. So any change in a management plan to improve soil health likely comes at a cost. So, the worst case scenario would be to embark on a management plan that would improve soil health and end up with lower yield. So what's your response to that statement?
Yes, thank you very much for that. So I don't know the exact numbers, but I know that Laura Vinard, again, in the University of Guelph in Ridgetown, has done some quite extensive research on adding cover crops into a system and has shown that adding cover crops can increase yields in certain systems. So I'd check out her research to confirm that for sure. But I don't know if the science is 100% there. Obviously, if you change practices, all of a sudden your yield's going to go up dramatically. I think what the Soil Health Institute and our team would mention is that improving soil health helps on the other end, helps with resiliency, helps in those really dry years or those extremely wet years. If you have strong soil and you have soil that can hold a lot of water, it can provide a bit of insurance policy in those tough years. So you won't be as bad off as sites that maybe aren't doing so. So that's one way to think about return on investment of those practices as well. And yes, we definitely recognize that changing practices definitely have a cost. We are trying to make sure that everyone knows that we're providing some considerations and recommendations. There's no enforcement behind it. There's no pushing. We understand everyone has their own system and they're quite comfortable in it. We're strictly looking at this from a soil health standpoint, understanding that there's a lot of other pressures on farmers, specifically financial. We're trying to mitigate that a bit by providing some information so they can reach out and join some cost share programs to get some funding, like through OSCA's RALP program. There's a great amount of funding available for reducing tillage during specific crops years. So we're trying to connect farmers with those resources, understanding that there's quite a financial risk on some of these practices. And we can always start small, see how things go. Our first recommendation is always adding cover crop after winter wheat if you haven't started yet. A pretty low cost and easy way to get started, and we would never recommend anything that's extreme cost or anything like that.